Commander Arlen Voss stood motionless, his boots sinking slightly into the ashen ground beneath him. The air was heavy, suffocating, carrying with it the acrid scent of charred metal and scorched earth. Around him stretched the skeletal remains of Lunara, once a vibrant colony teeming with life. Now, it was nothing more than a graveyard, a silent testament to the cruelty of the Draconist Syndicate. The sky above was a muted gray, thick with clouds of ash that swirled like restless spirits. Jagged remnants of buildings jutted out of the ground, their twisted metal frames reaching toward the heavens as if in a final, desperate plea for salvation. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint whisper of wind carrying the echoes of a life that no longer existed. Arlen knelt in the center of what had once been the colony square, his armor dusted with soot, his hands trembling as they held a small, weathered photograph. The image was faded, but the faces were unmistakable: his wife, her smile radiant and full of warmth, his young son, laughing as he clung to her leg, and the faint outline of an unborn child, captured in the curve of her belly. The edges of the photo were singed, a cruel reminder of the firestorm that had consumed them all. His voice, low and raw, broke the silence. "They called us weak," he whispered, his words heavy with bitterness. "They called us unworthy." His grip on the photo tightened, his knuckles widening as a tear carved a path down his soot-streaked face. "But when you burn a man's soul, you forge something stronger than steel rage." The memory of the attack was seared into his mind: Draconist warships descending upon Lunara like vultures, their sleek, reptilian designs glinting in the sunlight. They had come without warning, their weapons raining fire and destruction. Arlen had been helpless, stranded on a distant outpost, forced to listen as the screams of his people were silenced one by one. He had begged the Galactic Peace Accord for aid, only to be met with empty platitudes and bureaucratic excuses. Now, standing amidst the ruins, he felt the weight of his failure crushing him, but beneath it, something else stirred. It was a fire, a searing, unrelenting fury that burned away the despair. The Draconist Syndicate had taken everything from him: his family, his home, his future. And now, they would pay. Arlen rose slowly, his movements deliberate, as if the act of standing was itself a declaration of defiance. His gaze swept across the wasteland, his jaw clenched with resolve. He had spent his life serving the Galactic Peace Accord, believing in their promises of unity and justice. But now, he saw them for what they truly were: cowards, content to hide behind treaties while the Draconists slaughtered innocents. He turned his back on the ruins of Lunara, the photograph still clutched tightly in his hand, and began walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ghosts of the colony were watching, urging him forward. He didn't look back. There was nothing left for him here. In the days that followed, Arlen made his decision. He would no longer wait for justice. He would no longer plead for action. If the Galactic Peace Accord refused to fight, then he would fight alone. He would become the weapon that humanity needed, the blade that would cut through the heart of the Draconist Syndicate. His first move was to disappear. He abandoned his rank, his uniform, and his allegiance, slipping into the shadows of the galaxy's lawless sectors. There, he began to rebuild not a home, but an army. He sought out those who had been broken by the Draconists, those who had nothing left to lose. Mercenaries, smugglers, exiles, and survivors. He found them in the dimly lit corners of space stations and the forgotten depths of asteroid colonies. To each, he made the same promise: vengeance. They called themselves the Phoenix Legion, a name born from the ashes of their shared pain. They were not soldiers. They were not heroes. They were survivors, forged into something unbreakable by the fires of their pasts. And at their helm stood Arlen, his heart hardened, his mind consumed by a singular purpose. As the days turned to weeks, the Phoenix Legion grew. Their ship, the Eclipse Blade, was a patchwork of stolen technology and salvaged parts, a reflection of the crew itself, imperfect but deadly. Arlen trained them relentlessly, pushing them to their limits, shaping them into a force capable of striking fear into the Draconis Syndicate. But even as he prepared for war, Arlen could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had chosen a path of destruction, one that would demand sacrifices he wasn't sure he could bear. Yet, as he stared into the void of space, the photo of his family tucked safely in his pocket, he reminded himself of the promise he had made. The Draconis Syndicate had taken everything from him. Now, he would take everything from them. The void of space stretched endlessly before him, a silent and unforgiving expanse. Arlen Voss stood at the edge of a dimly lit cantina on Drexar Station, a crumbling outpost hidden in the lawless sectors of the galaxy. It was a place where morality was as scarce as clean air, where criminals, exiles, and the desperate gathered in the shadows to barter, scheme, and survive. The air smelled of rust and stale alcohol, and the faint hum of malfunctioning lights flickered above him, casting jagged shadows across the room. It was here, in this pit of despair, that Arlen began to build his army, not of soldiers, but of broken souls like himself. He named them the Phoenix Legion, a symbol of rebirth, of rising from the ashes of destruction. And just as the mythical phoenix was forged in fire, so too would his crew be shaped by their pain, their losses, and their thirst for vengeance. The first recruit was Tessa Ryland, a woman whose name was whispered with both awe and fear among the galaxy's black markets. Arlen found her in a cluttered workshop on the outskirts of the station, surrounded by half-assembled machines and the acrid tang of soldered metal. She was hunched over a console, her fingers moving with mechanical precision as sparks danced in the dim light. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked up as Arlen entered. "If you're here to buy, you're wasting your time," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "I don't sell to strangers." "I'm not here to buy," Arlen replied, his tone steady. "I'm here because I know what the Draconis took from you." At the mention of the Draconis, her hands froze. For a moment, the mask of indifference slipped, and Arlen saw the pain etched into her features, the tightness around her mouth, the shadows beneath her eyes. She straightened, her gaze hardening. "What do you know about it?" "I know they used your research to build weapons," Arlen said. "Weapons that destroyed entire colonies. I know you've been running ever since, trying to make up for what they forced you to create. And I know you want to make them pay." Tessa's jaw clenched, her fingers curling into fists. "You don't know anything about me?" "I know enough," Arlen said, stepping closer. "Join me, and I'll give you the chance to destroy the monsters who turned your genius into a tool for slaughter." For a long moment, Tessa said nothing. Then, with a sharp exhale, she turned back to her console. "If you're lying, I'll kill you myself," she said, her voice low. "But if you're serious, I'll make sure their empire burns." The next recruit was Jax Carter, a man whose reputation preceded him. Arlen found him in the middle of a brawl at a seedy bar on Erebus 9, a mining colony notorious for its lawlessness. Jax was lean and wiry, his movements quick and precise as he dodged a clumsy swing and delivered a brutal uppercut that sent his opponent sprawling. "Nice punch," Arlen said as Jax wiped blood from his knuckles and turned to face him. "You always fight this hard, or was that just for show?" Jax smirked, his dark eyes glinting with amusement. "Depends. You here to fight, or are you buying me a drink?" "Neither," Arlen said. "I'm here because I heard you're the best smuggler in this sector. And because I know you lost your sister in the Draconis bombardment of Haven's Reach." The smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous glare. "Careful what you say next," Jax warned, his voice low. I'm putting together a crew, Arlen said, unfazed. We're going after the Draconis. Hit their supply lines, cripple their resources, make them bleed. I need someone who knows how to navigate the shadows, someone who can get us in and out of places no one else can. Someone like you. Jax studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged, his smirk returning. Well, I've got nothing better to do. Count me in. The final recruit was Zara, a telepathic alien who had once served the Draconis Syndicate. Arlen found her in a quiet corner of the station, sitting alone with her hood pulled low over her face. Her skin was a pale, iridescent blue, and her eyes glowed faintly in a dim light, their depths filled with a sorrow that seemed almost otherworldly. You're not like the others, Arlen said as he approached. You don't belong here? Zara didn't look up. Neither do you? I know what you are, he said, lowering his voice. I know you served the Draconis. And I know you left because you couldn't stomach what they were doing. Her gaze lifted then, piercing and unblinking. You don't know what you're asking, she said softly. The things I've seen, the things I've done, they'll haunt you? They already do, Arlen said. But if you join us, you can use what you know to stop them. To save lives instead of taking them. Zara hesitated, her expression conflicted. Then she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Very well. But if you betray me, I'll know before you even think of it. With his crew assembled, Arlen turned his attention to finding a ship. It was Jax who led him to the Vanguard's Wrath, a stolen warship hidden in a derelict hangar on a backwater moon. The ship was a monstrosity, a hybrid of human and alien technology, its sleek, predatory design marred by battle scars and hasty repairs. This thing's a death trap, Tessa said as she inspected the vessel, her critical eye taking in every dent and exposed wire. Can you fix it? Arlen asked. She smirked. I can make it better. Under Tessa's guidance, the crew worked tirelessly to restore the ship. It became their home, their weapon, and their symbol, a testament to their resilience and determination. And when it was ready, the Phoenix Legion launched their first mission, targeting Draconis supply lines. The attacks were swift and devastating. The Phoenix Legion struck from the shadows, using the Vanguard's Wrath to ambush convoys, destroy outposts, and steal vital resources. With each victory, their reputation grew, and whispers of their exploits spread across the galaxy. For the first time, the Draconis Syndicate felt fear. And for the first time, Arlen felt hope not for himself, but for the countless lives he might save by bringing the Draconis to their knees. The Phoenix Legion was no longer just a crew. They were a force of nature, rising from the ashes of their pain to ignite a fire that would consume their enemies. The blackness of space hung still and silent, a vast, endless void. But on the surface of Draconis Prime, the Syndicate's outermost colony, chaos erupted like a storm. Fires raged across the barren, rocky terrain, their orange and red tongues licking at the darkened sky. Explosions shattered the eerie quiet, sending shockwaves through the ground and scattering debris in every direction. The once imposing Draconis military outposts, with their towering spires and fortified walls, were now crumbling ruins. The Phoenix Legion had struck. Arlen Voss stood at the edge of the battlefield, his breath steady despite the turmoil around him. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, where the Draconis forces scrambled to respond to the attack. Their soldiers, towering reptilian figures with scales that shimmered like polished obsidian, moved with precision, their guttural orders cutting through the roar of battle. But the Phoenix Legion fought like phantoms, slipping in and out of the shadows, their movements unpredictable and deadly. From the cover of a jagged ridge, Tessa Ryland unleashed a barrage of explosives she had rigged from scavenged materials. The blasts tore through the Draconis defenses, sending chunks of metal and stone raining down. Her face was smeared with dirt and sweat, but her eyes burned with determination. "That's for Haven's Reach, you bastards," she muttered under her breath. Jax Carter, despite his usual cocky demeanor, was deadly serious now. His rifle was steady in his hands as he picked off Draconist soldiers with unerring precision. He moved like a shadow, darting between cover with a speed and grace that belied his rough exterior. But even as he fought, there was a fire in his heart, a deep, unrelenting fury born from the loss of his sister. Zara, the telepath, stood at the center of the chaos, her alien features calm and focused. Her glowing eyes flickered as she reached into the minds of the Draconist soldiers, sowing confusion and fear. One by one, they faltered, their movements becoming erratic as they turned on each other in a frenzy of paranoia. "They are afraid," she said softly, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "They are starting to break." And above it all, Arlen watched, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions. This was what he had planned for, what he had dreamed of. The Draconist Syndicate, the monsters who had taken everything from him, were finally feeling the sting of their own cruelty. But as he watched the flames consume the colony, he felt no satisfaction. Only a hollow ache. As the Draconist defenses crumbled, Arlen activated a small device on his wrist. His voice, cold and unyielding, echoed across the galactic network, broadcast to every corner of the known universe. "You wanted war," he said, his tone laced with venom. "Then watch your worlds burn." The message was short, but its impact was immediate. Across the galaxy, people stopped and listened. Some cheered, inspired by the defiance of the Phoenix Legion. Others trembled, fearing the wrath of the Draconis that was sure to follow. And on Draconis Prime, the soldiers who heard it felt a chill run through their veins. For the first time, their empire so vast, so powerful seemed vulnerable. But the Draconist Syndicate was not an enemy to be underestimated. Within hours of the attack, their fleet descended upon the colony, a swarm of sleek, black ships that blotted out the stars. The Phoenix Legion had anticipated retaliation, but the sheer scale of the response was overwhelming. The Draconis were enraged, their pride wounded, and they were determined to make an example of the rebels who dared to defy them. The Vanguard's wrath, the Phoenix Legion's stolen warship, roared to life as the crews scrambled to escape. Tessa's hands flew across the controls, her voice sharp as she barked orders. "Shields up! Divert power to the engines. We need to move now." Jax was in the gunner's seat, his face pale but resolute as he fired at the pursuing ships. "We're not gonna make it," he muttered, his voice tight with pain. "There's too many of them." "We don't have a choice," Arlen said, his voice grim. "Hold them off as long as you can." The ship shuddered violently as enemy fire struck its hull, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the corridors. Sparks flew from the consoles, and alarms blared, their shrill tones adding to the chaos. Zara's voice cut through the noise, calm but urgent. "They are targeting our engines. We need to jump now. We can't jump until we clear the blockade." Tessa shot back, her fingers flying over the controls. "Just give me a few more seconds." Another blast rocked the ship, and this time, Jax cried out in pain. Arlen turned to see him slumped in his seat, blood seeping through his shirt. "Jax," he shouted, rushing to his side. "I'm fine," Jax said through gritted teeth, though his face was pale and his breathing labored. Just get us out of here?" Arlen's chest tightened as he looked at his friend, the man who had risked everything to fight by his side. "You'll be fine," he said, more to himself than to Jax. "You have to be." With a final surge of power, the Vanguard's wrath broke through the blockade. The stars stretched into streaks of light as the ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Draconis fleet behind. But the victory was hollow. The ship was badly damaged, its crew shaken, and Jax's condition was critical. In the medbay, Tessa worked frantically to stabilize him, her hands steady even as her eyes betrayed her fear. Arlen stood nearby, his fists clenched and his jaw tight. He had promised his crew vengeance, but at what cost? How many more lives would be lost before the Draconis Syndicate fell? Zara approached him, her voice soft. "You're questioning yourself?" Arlen didn't respond at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with doubt. "I thought this would feel different. I thought it would make the pain go away." Zara's glowing eyes met his, her expression unreadable. "Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only feeds them." Arlen looked away, his gaze fixed on the stars outside the viewport. The fire of his rage had driven him this far, but now, in the quiet aftermath of battle, he felt its weight pressing down on him. The Draconis Syndicate had to be stopped, of that, he was certain. But as he looked at Jax, lying pale and still on the medbay table, he couldn't help but wonder if the price of his vengeance was too high. The Phoenix Legion had struck its first blow, but the war was far from over. And as Arlen stared into the void, he knew that the path ahead would only grow darker. The asteroid belt was a graveyard of silence, its jagged rocks drifting aimlessly in the void. Shadows danced across the cold surface of the Vanguard's wrath, the stolen warship hidden within a labyrinth of celestial debris. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, oppressive, as if the weight of the crew's collective grief and anger had seeped into the very walls. They had escaped the Draconis fleet, but the scars of their battle lingered on their bodies, their minds, and their souls. The air in the main cabin was tense, thick with unspoken words. Tessa Ryland stood at the center of the room, her face flushed with anger. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with fury as she pointed at Arlen Voss, her voice sharp and cutting. "This isn't a crusade," Tessa spat, her words slicing through the silence. "It's a slaughter. We're bleeding out, one mission at a time, and for what? Do you even know how this ends, Arlen? Or are we just pawns in your vendetta?" Arlen's gaze was cold, unyielding. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, but there was a flicker of something buried deep in his dark eyes. "We knew the risks when we started this," he said, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. "The Draconis didn't hesitate when they turned my home into a graveyard. If we stop now, everything we've done will be for nothing." Tessa stepped closer, her jaw clenched. "You think that justifies dragging us into your war? Jax nearly died because of your obsession. How many more lives are you willing to throw away before you realize this isn't justice? It's madness." Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Arlen's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he didn't respond. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's engines. From the shadows, Zara watched the confrontation unfold. Her glowing eyes flickered, reflecting the tension in the room. She stepped forward, her voice soft but resonant, carrying an otherworldly weight that silenced even Tessa's anger. "They are afraid of you, Arlen," Zara said, her tone calm but laced with warning. "Your rage is consuming you. And it's consuming them. If you don't stop, you'll lose them. All of them." Arlen turned to her, his expression hardening. "I don't need a lecture on morality from someone who worked for the Draconis," he said coldly. Zara didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, piercing. I left them because I saw what hatred does to people. It turns them into monsters. You think you're fighting for justice, but you're blinded by your pain. You've become the very thing you despise. The words struck him like a blow, but Arlen didn't let it show. Instead, he turned away, his voice low and bitter. The Draconist didn't hesitate. Neither will I. The crew dispersed, the tension lingering like a shadow. Tessa stormed off to the engine room, her movements sharp and angry. Zara retreated to her quarters, her alien features unreadable but her aura heavy with sorrow. Jax, still recovering from his injuries, sat silently in the medbay, his gaze distant. Arlen remained in the cabin, alone. The silence pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. He stared out the viewport at the asteroid field, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had promised himself he would never stop, never falter, until the Draconist Syndicate was destroyed. But now, as his crew began to fracture under the weight of his vengeance, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Doubt. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Phoenix Legion's relentless attacks were tearing at the seams of the Draconist Syndicate. Supply lines were crippled, outposts destroyed, and their once unshakable grip on the galaxy began to falter. Civil unrest spread like wildfire, igniting in colonies that had suffered under the Syndicate's rule for generations. On Vordhan 7, a mining colony known for its brutal working conditions, workers rose up against their overseers, their chants of rebellion echoing through the dusty tunnels. On Eris Station, whispers of mutiny spread among the Syndicate's own soldiers, their loyalty wavering as they questioned the empire they served. The Draconist Syndicate, once a symbol of absolute power, was beginning to crumble. But the cost of their fall weighed heavily on the Phoenix Legion. For every victory, there was a loss. For every strike, a wound. As the crew regrouped in the asteroid belt, the fractures among them deepened. Trust was eroding, replaced by fear and resentment. Tessa avoided Arlen, her anger simmering beneath the surface. Zara watched him with quiet caution, her warnings unspoken but ever-present. And Jax, though loyal, seemed distant, his injuries a physical reminder of the price they were paying. Arlen, for all his resolve, began to feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The fire that had driven him for so long, the fire of his rage, his pain was beginning to consume him. He had sworn to destroy the Draconist Syndicate, but now, as he stood alone in the silence of the ship, he couldn't help but wonder. Was he destroying himself in the process? The Phoenix Legion's warship drifted in the shadow of a dying star, its hull battered but resilient. Inside, the air was thick with tension as the crew gathered to listen to the intercepted transmission. The voice that crackled through the speakers was sharp and deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much war. "This is Captain Riven," the voice declared. "Formerly of the Draconist fleet. I have information that could end this war. The location of the High Command. But I won't hand it over unless I speak to Commander Arlen Voss personally." The room fell silent. The name Riven carried a dangerous weight. He was once a high-ranking officer in the Draconist Syndicate, known for his ruthlessness in battle. Now, he claimed to be a defector. But why? And why now? Arlen stood at the center of the room, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The crew's eyes were on him, their emotions a storm of uncertainty and fear. Tessa was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp and biting. "This is a trap," she said, glaring at Arlen. "You know it is. The Draconists don't just defect. They don't betray their own unless they are trying to lure us into something." Zara, standing in the corner, tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing as if she were reading the unspoken thoughts in the room. "Riven's voice, it carries truth. but also desperation. He's hiding something. Jax, still pale from his injuries, leaned against the wall, his voice quiet but firm. Even if it's not a trap, how do we know we can trust him? The Draconists don't give up power easily. What's his angle? Arlen's gaze swept across the room, his expression hardening. We don't have to trust him, he said, his voice cold and resolute. If there's even a chance he's telling the truth, we have to take it. The High Command is the heart of the Syndicate. If we destroy it, we end them. Tessa stepped closer, her voice rising. And if it's a trap? If we walk into this and lose everything? You're gambling with our lives, Arlen. Again. Arlen's jaw tightened, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. This isn't a gamble. It's a war. And wars are won by taking risks. The neutral moon where the meeting was to take place was a desolate, barren wasteland. Its surface was a cracked expanse of ash and rock, illuminated by the pale glow of a distant sun. The wind howled across the empty landscape, carrying with it a faint, metallic tang that clung to the air. The Phoenix Legion landed their ship in the shadow of a jagged mountain, its sharp peaks clawing at the sky. Arlen stepped out first, his long coat billowing behind him as he surveyed the terrain. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, his every sense on high alert. Behind him, Tessa and Zara followed, their weapons ready but their faces tense. At the edge of a shallow crater, a lone figure waited. Captain Riven. He was tall and imposing, his Draconis heritage evident in the faint shimmer of scales along his neck and the sharpness of his features. His uniform, once pristine, was now torn and stained, a symbol of his fall from grace. His eyes, a piercing shade of gold, locked onto Arlen as he approached. You came, Riven said, his voice low and steady. I wasn't sure you would. Arlen stopped a few paces away, his expression cold and unreadable. If this is a trap, you won't live to see it succeed. Riven smirked faintly, but there was no humor in it. If this were a trap, Commander, you'd already be dead. The tension between them was palpable, like the charged air before a storm. Riven raised his hand slowly, a gesture of peace, and then began to speak. The Syndicate is crumbling, he said, his voice carrying a weight of exhaustion. Your attacks have left scars deeper than you realize. Supply lines are broken. Colonies are rebelling. Even within the High Command, there are whispers of dissent. They are afraid of you, Voss. Afraid of what you represent. Arlen's eyes narrowed. And what do I represent? Hope, Riven replied simply. And fear. To the people suffering under the Syndicate, you're a symbol of resistance. To the High Command, you're a monster. Either way, you've shaken their foundation. But if you want to finish this war, you need to strike at the heart. The High Command is vulnerable. I can give you their location. Tessa stepped forward, her weapon raised slightly. Why should we believe you? What's in it for you, Riven? Riven's gaze shifted to her, his expression hardening. What's in it for me? Survival. The Syndicate is a sinking ship, and I don't intend to go down with it. But more than that, he hesitated, his voice softening. I've seen what they've done. The lives they've destroyed. I've been a part of it. If I can help bring them down, maybe I can balance the scales. Riven turned back to Arlen, his golden eyes piercing. If you destroy the High Command, you'll shatter the Syndicate. But what comes after, Commander? Will you build, or will you burn? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Arlen's face was stone, his emotions buried deep. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to Riven, his voice low and cold. "Give me the location." Riven studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "It's on Kalar 9, a fortress world deep in Syndicate space. But it's heavily fortified. You'll need more than just brute force to get in." Arlen's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "We'll worry about that when we get there." As the crew returned to the Vanguard's wrath, the air was thick with unease. Tessa's anger simmered just beneath the surface, while Zara's silence spoke volumes. Even Jax, who usually found humor in the darkest of situations, seemed subdued. In the quiet of the ship's command room, Zara finally broke the silence. "He asked you a question, Arlen. One you didn't answer." Arlen didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the stars outside the viewport, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "What matters is finishing what we started." But as the ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, the question lingered in the minds of everyone aboard. Would Arlen Voss build a new future from the ashes of the Syndicate? Or would he burn everything, including himself, in his quest for vengeance? The volcanic planet Aetheris was a world of fire and fury, its surface a hellscape of molten rivers and jagged obsidian peaks. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground trembled with the constant rumble of eruptions deep beneath the crust. Beneath this inferno lay the heart of the Draconis Syndicate, their high command fortress, a sprawling labyrinth carved into the planet's core. It was a place of impenetrable defenses, hidden beneath layers of rock and fire, guarded by legions of soldiers and automated turrets. The Phoenix Legion's stolen Draconis ship descended through the choking clouds of ash, its hull glowing faintly from the intense heat. Inside, the crew prepared for what they all knew could be their final mission. The air buzzed with tension and the weight of unspoken fears. Using stolen Draconis technology, the Phoenix Legion bypassed the outer defenses. The ship slipped through the fortress perimeter like a shadow, its cloaking device masking their presence. But once inside, the subtlety ended. Alarms blared as the Legion launched their assault, their forces pouring into the dark, metallic corridors of the fortress. The halls of the High Command were a stark contrast to the chaotic world above. They were cold and sterile, lined with polished black steel and glowing red lights that pulsed like the heartbeat of a beast. The air smelled of ozone and machinery, and the distant hum of the planet's volcanic core reverberated through the walls. Arlen led the charge, his blade gleaming in the dim light. Behind him, Tessa and Zara fought with grim determination, their movements precise and deadly. The crew moved as one, their bond forged in the fires of countless battles. But even their unity was tested as Draconis soldiers flooded the corridors, their weapons blazing. The battle was chaos. Explosions rocked the fortress, sending shards of metal and sparks raining down. The screams of the wounded and the clash of weapons echoed through the halls. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh and smoke. Every step forward felt like a struggle against an unrelenting tide. At the heart of the fortress lay the command chamber, a vast circular room dominated by a massive holographic map of the galaxy. The walls were lined with towering pillars, each carved with the sigils of the Draconis Syndicate, their edges glowing faintly with molten red light. At the center of the room stood Chancellor Zephyr, the architect of the Lunara massacre, the man who had turned Arlen's home into a graveyard. Zephyr was a tall, imposing figure, his presence commanding even in the face of destruction. His armor gleamed like obsidian, and his eyes burned with a cold, calculating light. He stood calmly as Arlen entered, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "So, the infamous Arlen Voss," Zephyr said, his voice smooth and venomous. "The rebel who thinks himself a hero. Tell me, how many have you killed in the name of your so-called justice?" Arlen's blade was already drawn, its edge glinting with the faint glow of the room's light. His face was a mask of rage, but his hands trembled ever so slightly. "You murdered my people. My family. You turned Lunara into ash." Zephyr chuckled, a low, mocking sound that echoed through the chamber. "And you've done the same to my empire. Tell me, Commander, how does it feel to become the very thing you hate? To kill without mercy, to destroy without regret." Arlen's grip tightened on his blade, his knuckles white. "This isn't about me. This is about justice." "Justice?" Zephyr sneered. "Don't delude yourself. This is vengeance. And vengeance is nothing but a cycle of blood and fire. Kill me, and you'll prove that violence is humanity's true nature." For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. The sounds of battle faded into the distance, and all that remained was Arlen, his blade poised to strike, and Zephyr, standing tall and unafraid. The weight of Zephyr's words pressed down on Arlen like a crushing force. Was he truly any different from the Draconis? Was he just another monster, driven by hatred and pain? Tessa's voice crackled through his communicator, breaking the silence. "Arlen, we're running out of time. The core is destabilizing. You need to finish this." Zephyr smirked, his gaze unwavering. "Go on, Commander. Prove me right." Arlen's jaw clenched, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. But in the end, his rage won. With a swift motion, he drove his blade through Zephyr's chest. The Chancellor gasped, blood spilling from his lips, but his smirk never faded. "Kill me," Zephyr rasped, his voice weak but defiant, "and you'll only prove that violence is humanity's true nature." Arlen pulled his blade free, and Zephyr collapsed to the ground, lifeless. For a moment, Arlen stood over the body, his breathing heavy, his mind numb. He had won. But at what cost? The fortress began to collapse as the Phoenix Legion set off their charges. The ground shook violently, and molten rock poured through cracks in the walls, consuming everything in its path. The air was thick with heat and smoke, making it hard to breathe. Tessa was at the forefront, leading the retreat. Her face was streaked with blood and sweat, but her determination never wavered. She turned back to cover the others, her weapon blazing as Draconis soldiers pursued them. "Go," she shouted, her voice hoarse. "I'll hold them off." "No!" Arlen yelled, his voice raw with desperation. "Tessa, don't!" But it was too late. A massive explosion rocked the corridor, and a wall of fire and debris separated Tessa from the rest of the crew. Arlen screamed her name, his voice breaking, but there was no response. She was gone. The remaining crew barely made it back to their ship as the fortress collapsed into the molten core of Aetheris. The volcanic planet erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, a fiery beacon visible even from orbit. The Phoenix Legion had won, but the victory was hollow. Back aboard the Vanguard's Wrath, the crew was silent. The air was heavy with grief, the loss of Tessa a wound that cut deep. Zaris sat in the corner, her glowing eyes dim, her expression unreadable. Jax stared out the viewport, his hands trembling. And Arlen? Arlen sat alone in the command chair, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He had destroyed the Draconis High Command. He had avenged Lunara. But as he stared into the void of space, he couldn't shake the feeling that Zephyr had been right. Violence had consumed him, and now it was consuming everything he cared about. The Phoenix Legion had won the battle. But at what cost? The collapse of the Draconis Syndicate was swift and brutal, like a dam breaking under the weight of its own corruption. Across the galaxy, the once mighty empire fractured into warring factions, each scrambling for control. The streets of syndicate-controlled cities became battlegrounds, their skies filled with smoke and fire as rebel forces rose to claim their freedom. For the first time in decades, peace talks began to echo across the stars. Leaders from colonies long oppressed by the syndicate gathered in neutral zones, their voices trembling with hope and uncertainty. The galaxy, scarred and battered, teetered on the edge of a fragile new beginning. But for Arlen Voss, the victory brought no solace. He sat alone in the dim light of the Vanguard's wrath, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. The ship felt emptier than ever, its corridors silent except for the faint hum of its engines. Tessa's absence was a wound that refused to heal, and the faces of those who had fallen haunted him at every turn. Jax found him in the command room, staring out at the endless void of space. The younger man's face was pale, his eyes dark with anger and pain. He stepped forward, his voice sharp and cutting, breaking the silence like a blade. "We've won, Arlen," Jax said, his words heavy with accusation. "The syndicate is gone. But at what cost? Do you even see what you've become?" Arlen didn't turn to face him. His gaze remained fixed on the stars, his expression hollow. "We did what we had to do." Jax's fists clenched, his voice rising. "No. You did what you thought was right. And now Tessa's gone. Countless others are gone. You swore to fight for justice, but all I see is destruction. You've become the very thing you swore to destroy." The words hit Arlen like a physical blow, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. He knew Jax was right. The fire that had fueled his vengeance had consumed everything in its path, leaving only ashes behind. Later that night, Arlen sat alone in the ship's recording room, the faint glow of the console illuminating his weary face. He stared at the screen for a long time, his thoughts swirling in a storm of guilt and regret. Finally, he began to speak, his voice low and heavy. "The war is over," he said, the words feeling like both a relief and a curse. "But the scars remain. We've fought, we've bled, we've sacrificed everything. And for what? A galaxy that still teeters on the edge of ruin. I thought vengeance would bring peace. I was wrong." He paused, his throat tightening. "If humanity is to survive, we must be better than the ashes we leave behind. The Phoenix Legion is no more. It's time for something new. Something better." When the recording ended, Arlen sat in silence for a long time. Then, without a word, he left the ship. No one saw where he went. He vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only his words and the legacy of his fight. Years passed, and the galaxy slowly began to rebuild. The scars of war remained, etched into the landscapes of countless worlds and the hearts of their people. But amidst the ruins, there was hope. Former members of the Phoenix Legion like Jax and Zarad dedicated themselves to forging a fragile peace between species, working tirelessly to heal the wounds left by the Syndicate's fall. Jax became a diplomat, his fiery spirit tempered by the lessons of war. He traveled from colony to colony, his words carrying the weight of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in its potential for good. Zara, with her enigmatic presence and sharp mind, became a mediator, her glowing eyes a symbol of wisdom and neutrality. Together, they helped unite fractured worlds, their efforts laying the foundation for a new era. But Arlen Voss was gone. His name became a myth, whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. Some called him a hero, others a monster. To many, he was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the cost of vengeance and the fragile line between justice and destruction. On a rebuilt colony, where the skies were clear and the air was filled with the laughter of children, a young girl sat in a classroom. Her white eyes sparkled with curiosity as she raised her hand to ask her teacher a question. "Who were the Phoenix Legion?" she asked, her voice innocent and eager. The teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled softly. She walked to the front of the room, her steps slow and deliberate. "They were warriors," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "They fought for justice, for freedom. But they also taught us something important." The girl tilted her head, her curiosity growing. "What did they teach us?" The teacher's gaze grew distant, as if recalling a memory. "They taught us that peace is the hardest battle of all." Outside the classroom, a memorial stood in the center of the colony. It was a towering structure of black stone, etched with the names of those who had fallen in the fight against the syndicate. At its base, a single inscription glowed faintly in the sunlight. It was Arlen's final message, his words immortalized for generations to come. "You want war? Then watch your worlds burn. You want peace? Then fight for it."